Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the second annual Amazon Accelerate Virtual Summit for current and aspiring sellers. My name is Maxine Gray, and I'm a Senior Brand Marketing Manager on Amazon's Small Business Empowerment team, where I'm focused on our Black Business Accelerator, a $150 million commitment to helping build sustainable equity and growth for Black-owned businesses over the next 4 years. During this fireside chat, Dharmesh Mehta, Amazon's Vice President of Worldwide Customer Trust and Partner Support, and Earl Butch Graves Jr., President and CEO of Black Enterprise, will discuss the state of Black entrepreneurship, Amazon's Black Business Accelerator, and strategies to help build sustainable equity and growth for Black-owned businesses. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce you to our speakers. Dharmesh M. Mehta is Amazon's Vice President of Worldwide Customer Trust and Partner Support. He joined Amazon 8 years ago and currently leads the team responsible for creating a trustworthy shopping experience across Amazon stores by protecting customers, brands, selling partners, and Amazon from fraud, counterfeit, and abuse. The team also provides world-class support and helps empower Amazon's millions of third-party selling partners. He is a graduate of Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he earned a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science and Electrical Engineering, a Bachelor of Science in Finance, a minor in Economics, and a master's degree in Electrical Engineering and Computer Science. He also holds an MBA with high distinction from Harvard Business School. Earl G. Butch Graves Jr. is President and CEO of Black Enterprise. He received his bachelor's degree in economics from Yale University, where he was a standout scholar and athlete. Butch was a 4-year starter and captain of the Yale basketball team and graduated as the school's all-time leading scorer and the second leading scorer in Ivy League history. He went on to play professionally in the NBA for the Philadelphia 76ers, Milwaukee Bucks, and Cleveland Cavaliers. He joined Black Enterprise in 1988 after earning his MBA from Harvard University. During his tenure at Black Enterprise, he has served in many positions, including Vice President of Advertising and Marketing, and was promoted to his current position, President and CEO, in 2006. Under Butch's leadership, Black Enterprise has grown from a single title publication into a robust multimedia company that is the #1 Black digital media brand. Today, the company delivers content across 5 platforms, including magazine publishing, 2 nationally syndicated television shows, professional development events, and digital and social media. In addition to serving on numerous nonprofit boards, Butch also serves on the board of directors of AutoZone, Bermuda Tourism Authority, and is a trustee for the Committee for Economic Development. To everyone watching, Dharmesh and Butch will be answering a few questions at the end, so please go ahead and start sharing your questions in the live chat. Dharmesh, take it away.
Well, thank you, Maxine. And to the thousands of you watching us today, thank you for joining us on this conversation on the state of Black entrepreneurship. Hi, Butch.
Hey, Dharmesh. Pleasure to join you.
Thank you so much for being here. You know, I thought before we get into the deeper questions, maybe to get started in a little bit more lighthearted fashion, we do a little bit of a rapid fire to get to know you better.
Okay.
Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right. Coffee or tea?
Tea. Iced tea, though?
Iced tea. All right. Your favorite sport and professional sports team?
Favorite sport, basketball and golf equally. And favorite sports team, I'm going to still say the New York Knicks.
New York Knicks. All right. Well, favorite concert you've ever gone to and favorite singer or performer, dead or alive?
Favorite concert I ever went to was the Jackson 5, or what they were called the Jacksons. And favorite performer, Prince.
Awesome. Now that the world is opening back up a little bit, what's the next place on your bucket list that you'd like to visit?
Like to go to the Far East. Have not been to the Far East, so that would be #1 on the bucket list.
Awesome. Audiobooks or physical books?
Physical books.
All right. At Amazon, we like both.
Right.
And so what books are you listening to or reading these days?
I read mainly business books now, I should say. But the most interesting one I read more recently, I read a book on Martin Luther King that went into the days of leading up to when he was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. So, I don't have as much time to read books, but that would be my
Top one right now.
physical books versus listening to books would be the way.
Awesome. Well, one last one. If you could have dinner with anyone in the world, who would it be and why? And again, could be someone dead or alive.
Great question, but I would probably say, dead or alive, huh? Probably one of the presidents of the United States, so probably John F. Kennedy, and then Nelson Mandela together.
That would be an interesting dinner party.
Yeah.
All right. Well, now that we've gotten to know you a little better, let's jump right into what we're here to talk about today, which is the state of Black entrepreneurship, Amazon's Black Business Accelerator program, and some of the unique challenges and opportunities for Black-owned businesses in the United States. And so maybe one place I'd love to understand a bit better, you have a really impressive background. Well-rounded, you've got this really strong academic background with Yale and Harvard. You played in the NBA, multiple professional boards, plus the work you're now doing to lead Black enterprise. It really is impressive. But take us back to the beginning. What was it like growing up in the Graves household?
Well, I was blessed with having parents who were truly focused on making sure that we understood who we were. I had two younger brothers, I have two younger brothers. And when I say who we were in terms of being proud of ourselves as being African Americans, and that we could accomplish anything if we put our minds to it and worked hard. My father was a disciplinarian, was in the military, and so he was sort of a no-nonsense person, it was a no-nonsense person, and didn't believe in fooling around for no reason and what have you. So they were very focused on what we had to do academically, and therefore didn't make it an optional exercise for the three of us. And I think at the time it was, I used to look at him like, oh God, he's such a pain. But after the fact, I now recognize that all the things that he said, and my mother, who was an educator, my mother was taught elementary school as well, what they were doing was preparing us for what was going to be the next generation. But born and raised in New York, and I guess the greatest gift that my parents provided us was nothing material, but it was being exposed to a broad audience of people, Black and white and otherwise, and seeing how those people operated, successful people operated, and what they did, and understanding that it's not always necessarily what you know, but it's also who you know, mixed with what you know, that will provide you the opportunities that we would eventually get. So, wonderful childhood, nothing but great experiences, and keeping our family together was a very, very important thing. My father was a family-first person, and we did everything together as a family, and it's what's kept us close to this day.
That's awesome. That priority on family and education and understanding people is super powerful. Your father contributed and had many successes, and one of the things was he's a published author, and in his one of his national best-selling books, I think it was called How to Succeed in Business Without Being White.
Right.
He says that ownership is where true power and wealth lie. And it's one of the ways to uplift the entire Black community. And so I'm curious, some of your thoughts on the ways to increase business ownership and wealth in the Black community.
Well, I think at the end of the day, the greatest divide that we have in this country is not a digital divide. It's not a health divide. It's not a, education divide. It's a wealth divide. And I think what we have to do in the African American community is we've got to solve towards building wealth in our community. Because if you have wealth and you understand that building wealth it's our tagline at Black Enterprise is called Wealth for Life. But building wealth is about building wealth for a lifetime. And if you have wealth, then those other divides go away, right? Those other divides are nothing more than derivatives of a wealth divide. And so our focus and my focus has been, from what my father started, is that we're going to try to show and help people to build wealth through ownership, as you stated, because yes, working for someone else, you can have a great living and you can do very, very well. But owning your own business puts your future in your own hands. And that is a very, very powerful thing. And I think that communities of color, not just African American, but communities of color, need to be able to own what is their own and be able to control their destiny through ownership. And that's what we continue to push through Black Enterprise.
No, that's awesome. That notion of ownership and how to create equity through that is one of the things that motivated the launch of the Black Business Accelerator that we launched this past summer. And we've got multiple different pillars within that, but one of those has really been this importance of how to provide access to capital and get people started with loans and grants. And I'm curious, as you've worked with different Black-owned businesses, where are some of the places you see the biggest opportunities?
Well, the greatest opportunity for Black-owned businesses is to deliver a product or service that is not just directed to a smaller part of the community, but the broader community at large. And I think one of the wonderful things of what it is you're doing with the Black Business Accelerator is we're using technology to level the playing field and to broaden your opportunity to do business. So the traditional sense of doing business where you're only going to do business in a local community, or you're going to have a retail business that's only that store that happens to be here, it is not just that. It is the ability to actually market my product and service across the world, or the universe for that matter, and utilizing technology to help to level that playing field. So anything that I think that a Black-owned business can do in the way of service, in the way of a unique product or what have you, and using technology to do so, I think will help to level that playing field.
No, it's super interesting. One of the things we've talked about in the past is this notion that many years ago, if you wanted to build a brand and get a set of products out, it took a tremendous amount of capital, and you needed to have networks and relationships. Imagine trying to get into a big box retailer and get that relationship. It used to be so challenging. It still is very challenging. And one of the powerful things that things like e-commerce have really enabled is allowing far more people to be able to get started with a new brand or a new product. But I think you're spot on that there's absolutely still certain communities that really struggle in having the same access to capital, the same access to opportunity.
Sure.
I'm curious as you've looked at some of the programs Amazon's launched, and if there are things that you would tell us are opportunities or areas you'd push us to go and say, here's opportunity for us to be doing more for the Black-owned business community.
Yeah, sure. I mean, in June, Amazon launched its Black Business Accelerator. Let's call it BBA for short.
Yep.
Which provides Black-owned small business with financial assistance, education, mentorship, marketing, and promotional support to help them succeed in selling Amazon stores. I must tell you that I was really excited to hear that news. And in fact, Black Enterprise covered the launch of this program to ensure that our readers knew about the opportunity to partner with Amazon and accelerate their business. The country, as everyone knows, has faced a racial reawakening over this past 12 to 16 months, and many corporations have made pledges and commitments that seek to reinvest in the African American community. Give us a moment about what's the story behind the impetus for BBA, and can you share more about what inspired Amazon to launch this program and why this summer turned out to be the right time?
Yeah, one of the things we pride ourselves on at Amazon is that great ideas can come from anywhere. They can come from a fulfillment center worker to a corporate employee. They can come, from someone who's new and at the entry level to very senior leaders. And many of our greatest ideas have come from all over the place. And on this specific one, some of the earliest ideas that contributed elements of what are part of BBA actually came from three individuals, Rashad Lewis, Tiffany Johnson, and Jeremy Erdman. And those three, they saw an opportunity here. They saw a gap in what the current kind of market was providing, and they started to share it with others. In classic Amazon fashion, we like to write documents. We like to write press releases, which are often looking at an end state and working backwards from where we want to get to. They shared that with a number of people. And I think you're spot on that there was a reawakening over the last 12 to 15 months. And I think that increased the number of people talking about this topic. One of the things that was interesting and, we reflected on is many companies moved really fast to come out with statements, saying we support Black-owned businesses, we want to help. And, some of them putting very large dollar figures behind those statements. And we were more intentional. We took our time. And so we had a small business empowerment team that picked up this idea and said, we have to figure out what we're going to do here. But we didn't want to rush and just get something out there. We didn't want to rush and just put a number out there. We wanted to really figure out how we could help. We wanted to meet these businesses where they were. And we spent a lot of time talking to Black-owned businesses, both who were selling in our store and not selling in our store, and understanding the real challenges they had and some of the unique elements that are different from other small businesses. And so we built up some of those initial seeds. And later in 2020, we actually started a pilot program where we took a small group of Black-owned businesses and started offering a slightly different service to them and try to assist them. And kind of along the way, we worked with our Amazon Black Employee Network, which we call BEN for short. And as you've noticed, we like to use lots of acronyms. We partnered with government organizations like the Minority Business Development Agency and the U.S. Black Chambers and others. And we really wanted to shape this program to figure out how it's not just a reaction to the events of the last 2 years, but how we could create long-term sustainable growth, ownership, and equity. And that kind of culminated in the announcement this past June of the Black-owned Business Accelerator. We put $150 million behind it to start, but we're just getting started. We're still learning a ton. We're getting feedback all the time, and we're going to continue iterating on that program as we go.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. Well, first off, I appreciate the fact that you took your time, because Amazon took its time and was intentional about it. One of the things that's been disappointing, frankly, to Black-owned businesses has been these grand pledges and announcements that have no follow-up, right? Now, we at Black Enterprise, we're going to make sure to hold people accountable and hold these corporate America accountable to their pledges, I said, because, many of them were knee-jerking to the impact of what happened with George Floyd. And all of us saw and recognized how ridiculous and shameful the incident was, but it's not the first incident, and unfortunately probably won't be the last incident. So what we need from corporate America is having intentional, thoughtful programs where they're really trying to do something, not for PR's sake, but they're really trying to do something to change people's lives, and Amazon has done that. So kudos to the individuals that came up with the idea, and more importantly to Amazon investing in such an important program.
No, absolutely. And, it's absolutely something that, we were intentional in taking our time, but we also realized there's a lot of room to go from here. And, we continue to learn from this program and make sure we deliver it in a uniquely Amazon way. And so it's really a springboard. We've started early, and there's a lot more to come from that. I'm curious, in your experience in leading Black enterprise and working with Black-owned businesses, what are some of the other big challenges you see that are areas we could be addressing?
Well, there's two major challenges. I mean, the obvious one is sort of access to capital, but anybody will say that. Any small business would tell you that access to capital. But I think that the two largest challenges, the first one is, and the biggest one is, scale. And I think the biggest challenge for small businesses, period, Black-owned businesses in particular that happen to be small, is how do I do business with corporate America at in a larger way? How do I do business with Amazon? How do I do business with Walmart? How do I do business with Chase? And it may seem on surface like, okay, this would be, they have a supplier diversity program, let me get involved with that program, what have you. But what they quickly find out is that they don't have the capacity to fulfill what is needed. And so scale ends up being our biggest obstacle. If you are a person who has one of the small business sellers, right, and they make this great product, whatever the product may be. They make, a brand new sneaker that, helps people to climb stairs faster than anything ever before, or a new barbecue sauce. I use that one because that's one that actually Walmart had used with me. And they said, listen, we sell 139 different barbecue sauces, but we love yours, and we know that your grandmother helped you to create this, and it's the best one ever. And the person says, great, and they said, we're going to do a contract with you. And they said, what we're going to need is, we're going to need 20 million of these, because we have to distribute this to all our stores nationwide, across the world, what have you. And this person said, well, I can't quite do 20 million because right now I'm doing them in my garage, and I only can do 1,000 a week. So you see where the challenge is that we generally oftentimes have very creative and great ideas, but we don't have the scale to be able to do the contracts that larger corporations expect. So I think one of the things that hopefully corporate America do in their program will do is to help to invest in these companies so they can get to scale. And once they get to scale, then they can hire more people. Because one of the facts that exist, quite honestly, is that in excess of 90% of Black-owned businesses are sole proprietorships. So at the end of the day, that means they do nothing more than work for themselves, right? They don't have anyone else they've hired. And so that's a challenge. And then the second challenge, and is one I know that you guys are addressing, but I would love to hear more from you about it, is payment terms. Because payment terms continues to be a huge challenge from a cash flow perspective. If small businesses don't have access, they're not publicly traded, all the money that they are generating has to go back towards investing in the business or paying their people. And if the vendor that they're working with tells them, okay, we're going to put you into this portal and you're going to have a 60 or 90-day terms, it just simply won't work. So those to me, beyond access to capital, there's three challenges: access to capital, getting to scale, payment terms. If those three are solved, then you're going to see the growth of Black-owned businesses accelerate quite a bit.
Yeah, I know I think it's very powerful what you're saying. It's also resonates a lot with, as we were designing BBA and some of the things we thought about, for our sellers in general. One of the things that sellers who've sold into some of these large retail chains have told us that they've really appreciated is usually those terms they're net 60, net 90, it's quite some time. And when you think about this brand owner, the seller, they had to put capital out way in advance because they were buying, the raw materials and producing these goods. And that was all in advance of, actually selling them to someone. And then it's still another 60 to 90 days, becomes quite long. And so, we generally pay our sellers, 7 days after the items are delivered, they're available for disbursement. And, we regularly disperse, but you can request them anytime. But that's only one element. I think, you hit on two other topics that have been really important to us. This notion of scale. We talk about a lot, we have Amazon Retail. Amazon Retail is a very large individual seller in our store. At their size, they've got access to capabilities. They have access to have built, their own fulfillment network or liquidation capability or whatnot. But part of what we've been able to do through our store is really democratize that and say, how do we take that big business capability and give it to small businesses? So giving a small business owner who may only be a couple of people and say, you've now got a network of hundreds of fulfillment centers all around the country and the world that can store, pick, pack, and ship your item. You've got access to our customer service. So you don't need to work 24/7 to answer customer calls and support every language, but you can have Amazon do this for you, through our, more than 130 customer service centers. But there's obviously things we can continue to do to improve in those. But one of the big gaps that you started with was, having that access to capital. And we've tried to address this in a couple different ways, but are you still learning? We're exploring grants for people who are new. They don't have a proven track record. They're really just looking for pure cash grants to get started. And we've got a program where we're doing grants that are about $10,000 for a small business. Some are a little bit larger, some a little bit smaller, in partnership with Hello Alice. And we're trying to see how to figure out that grant program. And then on top of that, we've got a couple different lending programs. Those are really more for someone who's got some track record, they've got some history. And A couple of weeks ago, we announced a new Amazon community lending capability in partnership with Lendistry that similarly is targeting some underserved segments of the population. I'm curious, you're certainly a thought leader on some of these challenges and opportunities that are associated with building wealth through entrepreneurship for the Black community. And I'm curious, over time, where are the areas you're really focused on?
Well, we're focused. You used the word before, the democratization of business, and how do we level this playing field? To me, I think that we have to be involved in the investment business, and what I push our folks to do is identify where do we see opportunity, right? And where I see opportunity is providing content and information, because that's how you change the playing field for folks, is demystifying. I'm maybe going to change the word, the other one. I'm going to demystify what it means to be successful in business, and can you do it? And most times, the only thing that's keeping people away from it is their own mind is keeping them out of, I can't do it. They have a mindset they're looking for a reason to say, I can't make this, I can't do this, I can't do whatever. And so what we do, we're doing it through our conferences in particular, is we're trying to rebuild confidence or build confidence in people. So we have everything from a Women in Power Summit, a Black Men Excel Summit, a Entrepreneur Summit, and all of those things are intended to provide information, access to networks where they can meet people that can help them to move themselves forward, because controlling one's destiny is, we believe, the most important thing, right? While it's great to be able to work, and many people, listen, I'm not saying that people should not join corporate America, right? And do their thing. If they can do it and they can be given an opportunity, yes, they should. And we're getting more of those opportunities. We're starting to see people being pushed into, and corporations finding that diversity enriches your company. It doesn't take away from your company. But that said, the other part of where we focus on is on the entrepreneurship side. And I'm convinced we are very creative people. We're willing to work hard. We just need to demystify some of the things that may stand in the way. But as time goes on and working with companies like Amazon, we'll be able to make it much easier for folks.
Oh, that's absolutely true. We've seen a lot of interest from Black-owned businesses as we've gotten started with the Black Business Accelerator. And one of the key learnings for us is, in addition to the ones we've talked about so far, has been, for many of our sellers who are trying to focus on scaling because they've got a product, they've got it in the market, and they're trying to figure out how to scale it. They're trying to go from 1,000 to 10,000 to 100,000. But for many of these Black-owned businesses, they're a little bit earlier in the funnel. They've got an idea, and they're really just trying to get that first product created. And it's been an interesting learning for us on just, again, how do we meet businesses where they are and address the real opportunities they have. I'm curious if there's any other challenges you'd highlight or advice, for those Black-owned businesses that are just getting started, maybe early, and are trying to figure things out.
Well, the other thing that I think that the other challenge, and this kind of addresses scale, but what I would suggest people do is partner with someone like yourself, and get that will help you to get to scale faster. Meaning, you don't need to have 20 people, 20 Black-owned businesses in a particular city, right? In Seattle, who all provide pens and pencils and paper products, what have you. Because then what happens is that by definition, you are sitting there fighting over a smaller contract, right? And what I would submit to Black-owned businesses is, I want to play, when I go to pitch Black Enterprise, I tell them up front, I want to be in the main event budget. I don't want to be in their sideshow budget. Because the sideshow budget, by definition, means I'm going to be sitting here battling over crumbs rather than competing for the main event budget. And so my advice is the fastest way to scale is to say, you know what, let me bury my ego, right? Because the question you have to ask yourself is, would you rather own 100% of a company that generates $100,000 a year in sales, or would you rather own 25% of a company that generates $20 million in sales? And it should be pretty simple for you to figure that out. That's equity. You don't have to own 100% of equity. And so, unfortunately, sometimes in our community, we believe that you need to have 100% ownership in order for it to count, and you don't, right? Share in that. Find other partners just like yourselves. And if I could get two other people who were in the same business as me, and then I could get to scale that much faster, so be it, right? And I've done it in my personal life, right? So I'm, outside of Black Enterprise, I'm invested in a couple of other businesses with partners who happen to be African American,
right,
who complement my skill set and I complement their skill set. And now we're able to combine our resources to invest in something that we would otherwise ordinarily have to come in at a smaller level. So that is absolutely essential. You see it in many other ethnic communities where they come together, they pool their resources, and they invest. And that's something that we need to do a much better job with African Americans. One of the things that has been unique, and Amazon is really known for its leadership principles. And it's one of the things that makes this company peculiar in its own way. Can you tell me a little bit more about what are some of the Amazon leadership principles and the role they played in helping to launch this Black Business Accelerator?
Yeah, so Amazon actually has these leadership principles are very unique. I've worked at many companies that have some kind of mission statement or vision statement, and they have different levels of kind of percolating through the org. But Amazon's leadership principles really are a bit peculiar. They're not just how we hire, they're not just how we evaluate performance, but they kind of permeate a lot of what we do. It's I think for someone new to the company, it's strange sometimes. You're sitting in a meeting and people start throwing down leadership principles at you. But we have 16 leadership principles, and they actually don't change that often, but they're always continually being tweaked every few years. There might be a new one or a little tweak. We added 2 new ones this summer, but there were a number of these that informed the Black Business Accelerator. Whether it was things like our focus on customer obsession, which is really around starting from where the customer is and working backwards from that, or about earning trust, which is really around listening attentively and treating others with respect, and realizing that you may not know everything. But one of the new ones that I think really applies is a leadership principle that's called success and scale bring broad responsibility. And it's this notion that, given the size of Amazon and the number of people we can touch, the number of businesses we can touch, it really leans into this fact that we've got to give back to our local communities and to the planet and for future generations. And we've got to keep getting better day after day after day. And this is absolutely one of those places where, some corporations, if you just had a pure profit incentive in the short term, you'd make different decisions than we're making. But this is one of the impetuses behind the Black Business Accelerator was how to create greater equity and give back to the community and try and do our part in a way that helps a set of businesses succeed, delights a bunch of customers with great products, and that's obviously good for Amazon in the end too.
Yeah, I think one of the things that would be interesting to understand, because people hear about Amazon and say, okay, I want to do that, and they say, and they have absolutely probably the wrong impression, because they say, well, Amazon is going to hurt small businesses, when in fact, actually, it's quite the opposite, right? You are demystifying and trying to find ways to bring on small business, but help to sort of demystify this notion that Amazon, the reputation that people would, they're there to put small businesses out of business, they're there to put big boxes out of business, what have you, when really you're actually working with millions of small businesses and thousands of larger businesses and helping them to move their products and service. It would be important for the audience to hear and understand actually what is Amazon's commitment to that versus what they may view as a reputation.
Yeah, no, it's a super important and sometimes a misperception, right? It's quite interesting because Decades ago, many small businesses that, were operated in some area watched, 30 years ago as many big box retailers showed up in town. And if you sold goods that were very similar to what that big box retailer showed up with their, large supersized store, it was really hard to compete. It was really hard to compete when you were selling kind of commodity products that they had as well, but they had cheaper and they had 50 more things. And that was a tough thing for small businesses, 30 years ago, 20 years ago. But what's going on with Amazon is actually very different, because when small businesses show up to Amazon, like your example of the barbecue sauce, or, I was earlier today talking to someone who builds, support-a-back. It's these back roller things. Right. Tomorrow, we've got Danielle Sorensi-Jones coming in with these Power Hands gloves that are for athletic training. And these are innovative products. And for brands and businesses that are creating these products, Amazon's amazing, because what it provides is access to hundreds of millions of customers, the ability to leverage a bunch of this scale that we've already got for you, so you can focus on inventing your amazing product. The facts kind of play this out. We started this marketplace business 20 years ago, and so it represented 0% of our sales at the time. Right. And today we've got roughly 2 million selling partners around the world. That represents 60% of what's sold on Amazon. So many customers don't realize when they buy on Amazon, they're more likely to be buying from a small business than from a big company. And it's a really powerful thing, but certainly something we have to keep reinforcing. Almost everyone watching this right now is a small business. And we're very lucky to have their partnership. And it's very powerful what we've been able to do together.
Yeah, that fact, and I learned that the other day, that 60%, and I want the audience to hear that again, 60% of what is sold on Amazon is sold through Amazon Marketplace, which means that these are small businesses by definition, and you have the opportunity to level the playing field and to sell your product and service in this grand marketplace that you would never otherwise have the opportunity to do. So it's very unique. I host a digital video series called From the Corner Office, where I have candid conversations with today's most influential business leaders and newsmakers about today's most pressing issues. And part of the impetus for me for creating this series was to amplify the experiences and voices of African American professionals and demonstrate that representation is essential within corporate America. How is Amazon increasing representation for Black-owned businesses that are selling in your store?
Yeah, no, I think it's a very important topic. One of the stats I like to reference that was an eye-opener for me was, just looking across the industry. So this is not specific to Amazon, but from the U.S. Census Bureau, they had this data that of U.S. retail businesses, regardless of where they sell, online, offline, on Amazon, not on Amazon, only 6% of them have a Black owner. And that's as opposed to, U.S. society, where it's 14% of adults are Black.
Right.
And that's just shocking, right? And then you take that, and then you take the current pandemic we're in, and you look at Black individuals, and Black people have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. And then you take the things we were talking about earlier in terms of, access to capital and mentorship and the inequity that exists in a number of those. And it really ties back to that leadership principle we were talking about earlier on kind of our success and scale bring broad responsibility. And it's super important that we continue to do better and be better for our customers and our selling partners and the society at large. And we know that every day we've got to do even more tomorrow. And so Amazon's Black Business Accelerator is just one example of that, where we're increasing access to opportunity. And we're doing that both to attract more businesses or potential businesses who may be thinking about getting started and help them make that leap, help them give the access to capital or the account management or the support or the promotional and marketing capabilities to get them off the ground. But then for the people that have already started, to help them continue to scale and succeed. And so we continue to launch new things here. We've got dedicated storefronts. We recently launched discoverability enhancements so that when someone's shopping through our store, they can easily find a Black-owned business in the search results. But capital, content, and community are really three big important components of what we're trying to do here. I'm curious, Black Enterprise has been at this much longer than we have. You've got a wealth of experience. How do you approach those kind of three areas?
Well, the most important thing, you have to be in business that's successful before you can do something that's going to be, quote, good for the community. And oftentimes we put an idea ahead of, making the business successful, making the business profitable, right? So you can't just have a passion without a plan. And that's what I try to advise folks all the time about. They say, oh, I want to do this. It's something I really want to do. I know how to do it, what have you. I said, okay, that's great. But can this business or this plan actually turn into a business that can do something? I said, because once your business is successful, then yes, you can start focusing on education. Our passion at Black Enterprise, started with my father, was on education, because he knew that the only difference between those the haves and have-nots, was a very fine line. And more oftentimes than not, it was an education opportunity or educational opportunity they did not have. But to give back, you got to be successful. And, it's interesting how business has evolved over time. But, with my father, he was very focused on, we're going to dress up every day. And I had shared this with you before, that with my father, we were suit and tie every day until March 2020, right? Until this pandemic hit. But it wasn't because he was trying to be difficult. He was trying to set a tone for what was going to make us unique at Black Enterprise. And his point was, there's nothing casual about business, therefore I don't have business casual, right? And it sounded corny at the time and what have you, and it made people sometimes uncomfortable, but it was really about trying to make sure that we put our best professional foot forward and that we didn't have one arm tied behind our back, right? Because we know going in, oftentimes, I'll go into a presentation. At the end of the presentation, the people will spend more time congratulating me on being articulate rather than listening to what it is that we're saying about our business. And so I don't ever take that for granted, right? I think how you present yourself and how you convey that in a professional manner is what's going to be, is as I said, there's a very fine line between success and failure. And my father used to say to me all the time, the harder you work, the luckier you'll become, right? And so I'm not going to let someone outwork me. Right? They may out-earn me, but they're not going to outwork me. And I think that if we continue to keep pushing ourselves and saying that we're going to teach people, give them the information, find ways to get access to capital, demystify business, and focus on wealth, then we're going to see a difference. And programs like Amazon's BBA, the Black Business Accelerator, is a welcome. I will say this, and I'm not saying it because I'm here with UC and Amazon, but it's a welcome opportunity for Black-owned businesses in an environment that has not always necessarily been as welcoming as it should be.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And it's interesting, one of the things you mentioned on this, the focus has to be on first, driving that success and, helping deliver those results for that business. It's interesting because when we launched the Black Business Accelerator, the statement we use publicly is how much money we're putting behind this program. What we goal ourselves on internally is the success of these businesses. Because if it doesn't work, if we don't get more businesses in and we don't have them driving sales, the whole thing doesn't matter. And so that resonated really strongly. I'm curious. We have a bunch of sellers and individuals who are watching today, and many of them are passionate about the same topic. They want to help. I think people often don't know where to get started, and I'm curious if you have any advice for individuals or small businesses or companies that want to help be part of the solution and create sustainable equity and growth for Black-owned businesses.
Yeah, I've got two things. One for corporate America, message to corporate America, and one for small businesses. And I'm talking to all small businesses, not just Black-owned small business, but obviously Black Enterprise focuses on that. As it relates to small businesses, I would say to you, it's got to be your willingness to network and meet with the right people, right? People are not going to knock on your door to ask you to come do business with them, right? So, or as I like to say to my sales team, don't tell me, you don't give good phone, right? Go and meet with the people you want to, because ultimately business is about a relationship. And it's about, do I know Dharmesh? And people do business with people that they like, right? I mean, it's really just that simple. So my encouragement to small businesses is to find conferences, find events, find things where you're going to meet people outside of your comfort zone and tell them about what it is you're doing and look for those opportunities. And my advice to corporate America is to say that you can only do well when everyone else is doing well, right? And that means that a broad portion of your customer base oftentimes are people of color. And so if that in fact is the case, then you need to make sure that your board is diverse with Black people, that you're doing business with Black-owned businesses, and that you are supportive of the very communities that you're operating in, so that your company the market share that you enjoy is commensurate with the people that you're employing, the percentage of business that you're doing business with, the people that are sitting on your board, and now you're going to get an enrichment and a diversity of thought, which ends up helping to make your company that much better.
No, well, thank you for this very insightful and empowering conversation, Butch. We're lucky you've got a wealth of experience and expertise in this area. We really appreciate your partnership just as we're getting started with BBA, and I thank you for being here.